All right, so we're here with some boxing royalty today. Gavin Macmillan, thank you for joining us. If people don't know him, you've worked with the likes of Manny Pacquiao, Miguel Cotto in the MMA world. You worked with Dominic Cruz, George St. Pierre. Let's backtrack a little bit. How do you end up in South Africa?
Now it's 2011. I got a phone call from Alfred Reeder. Alfred Reeder is the director of PVM in South Africa. They're obviously a nutritional supplement company, and they at the time were contracted to do the physical conditioning for the Toyota Cheetahs. He had figured out that if they don't get their injury rates down, they were going to have trouble keeping their franchise rights and staying in the Super 15. And they had sought out a different way of trying to train people that could potentially reduce the number of injuries and also improve performance. And so we talked a few times on the phone, and then he and Neil Duplessis, who at the time was the head trainer for the Cheetahs, got on a plane and came to see us for 2 weeks. And that started a relationship that's gone on, 9 years now, and they had enormous success in what they implemented with the Cheetahs. They threw out all the Olympic weightlifting tools they were using, switched over to the system that I've spent my lifetime developing. They had a 97% drop in injuries in their rugby season the next year. They had one catastrophic injury, made the playoffs, sent 7 guys to the national team. I think what it really revealed is that if you have the right tools combined with the right trainer, what you can achieve, because the tools that we use and stuff like that, I think, are by far the best that I've seen in the world. We're obviously looking for new things and an edge and everything else, but if you don't have the right carpenter, then it's just another drill. And Neil did an extraordinary job in terms of the detail that he went to implementing it, the attention to each of the players that needed it, and what we do is specific to each individual. It's not a generalized program where everybody comes in and does 20 squats and 15 power cleans and then you call yourself improving sports performance. That's a joke to me. So that's where it started. And now where it's evolved is PVM and I, we've partnered on developing this new technology platform that can measure all the different types of strength in a functional movement pattern. It's never been done before, and it's going to get launched in 2021. Really the difference, I'd say, coming here is the people. And again, without having great people involved in all this process, nothing works. And PVM, the people, the founders of the company are Alfred's parents. You don't meet two better people in the world than that. Alfred himself is extraordinarily intelligent. He's a person that's able to really take complex problems and put them down into simplified forms. And he's constantly trying to push himself in knowledge-wise. Neil, who runs our SSL franchise here, to me, I consider him the best trainer in the world at this point. He's his ability in terms of physical conditioning from a cardiovascular standpoint to the power components to really learning the mechanics of movement, which without you're useless. He's really taken our platform to another level. The physical therapist that runs their division here, don't think she has an equal. Her ability in terms of getting players back to a high level is as good as you'll see anywhere in the world. And again, it's it just shows you it really comes down to the people implementing it. It's not so much the tools you have. You have to have both.
Well, you mentioned good people, and that's one of the reasons why you're here. You wanted to, it makes life a lot easier. Who are some of the good people that you've worked with in the past? I know I mentioned a few of the names that you have worked with, but I mean, it goes a long way to making your job easier if someone can understand what you do as well.
Yeah, and I think, understanding it's one thing. It's a relationship-based business. And so I've been really fortunate with the people that I've gotten. And you have to have a little luck that way. I think there's a lot of great trainers out there really trying to do the best that they can, and with the skill sets that they have and the tools that they have, but maybe didn't get the right break or didn't get the right exposure and things like that. And I was, lucky to, in 2011, get a phone call from George St. Pierre about helping him rehab his knee. I'm not a physical therapist, but he knew we had done it so many times with football players. He wanted to put his trust in somebody that got someone back in contact sports. That relationship then spurred on my relationship with Freddie Roach, and that led to, you know, Miguel Cotto and stuff. So you feel a sense of, you know, pride that you're doing your job along the way. But really, I got really fortunate with a few things that happened, and these people are all extraordinary in their own way. It's like, where do you start? If you start with somebody like George and you look at how humble he is and his constant thirst for knowledge and the constant pushing of himself to be the best in every capacity he can be, then you combine it with his mental abilities in terms of fight IQ. There's probably nobody better in MMA than that. You combine that with the fact that he's a very, very good athlete in general. In a sport that athleticism is what separates you once, because their levels of technique now are so even, because the sport's evolved over the last 15 years. The guy was a garbage truck driver. He was a bouncer at a bar, and he wanted this so bad, you know, he would get on a bus and drive to and take the bus to New York all the time just to work with John Danaher, who's the best jiu-jitsu, again, you know, arguably the best jiu-jitsu coach in the world, but that was his constant need to try to be the best in the world at what he was doing. Miguel Cotto, when Freddie introduced me to him, and he was at a really bad part in his career, and I've had a lot of that because, like George, it was his ACL and his knee and his career's on his line, but you know, Miguel had lost 2 fights. Career's kind of out of whack, and you're talking about a guy who's already a Hall of Fame fighter. And went to Freddie because he needed to get a jolt to his career back, and they trusted me to get him ready for his fight conditioning wise. Everything Miguel had been doing, I stopped. You know, he was running every day. The conditioning he was doing was hurting him. And when he started actually talking about his big fights in the past history and how he physically felt the night of the fight, you could really see it in the results and the ones that he lost. And this guy's a warrior. I mean, you know, you look at the fights that he's been in and the people he's had to take on, and you know, the whole, you know, issue of the padded gloves where, you know, you see his face after that. But imagine the guts to insist on fighting the person that did that to you again. Mm-hmm. And he insisted on it because he knew what had been done to him and wanted to take this guy out. And so Miguel, it was like, okay, we're not running anymore, what are we doing? And so you had to re-educate him in terms of what I think is the best way to do that. Boxers don't run, ever. So why are you using running as your conditioning tool? There's very short movement patterns in small spaces. It's front to back, side to side, not much else to that. And so everything we do is focused around what can transfer to actually fighting better in a ring. And my job is to make sure that the fighter is prepared every single day for his fight preparation in terms of his work, for instance, with Freddie. If he comes in there too exhausted from what I'm done with him, and because I've beat him up running or I've beat him up with weights, which don't work either, then how is he going to start executing the strategy he needs from a fight standpoint and really perfect it? Because conditioning coaches don't ever win a fight, ever. They lose it. And these, you know, when you get into this community and all these guys like trying to take credit for all this stuff that they think they're doing with a fighter, he has to last 36 minutes in boxing. At max, you've got to last 25 minutes in the MMA, depending on whether it's a title fight or not. So your job is to make sure that in boxing, that your guy can move properly for 36 minutes. It goes back and forth from high threshold anaerobic to into your midterm energy systems. And that he can, if he has to, throw 1,000 punches. It's really that simple. If we can get him more powerful also at the same time, then that's an added benefit. So what Freddie did when he got Miguel was started bringing his left hand back, because he'd been told, like, let's get your right arm going. You got the best left arm in the world. Really significant jab, but your hook is world class, and so that has to dominate every single fight that you're in. And then it was a matter of, we don't want you standing in the pocket anymore. We want you in, out, moving. And, you know, Freddie's really, really good at just analyzing what his fighter has, and then how do we implement that against our opponent. And then once I understand what he's got to do with each guy, then you just design the conditioning, or subtly change it a little bit around what he's going to need to do with him. But you need to get the buy-in of your fighter, and Miguel bought in, and he's to me, the best client I've ever had, like just relationship wise, and really seeing the appreciation that he showed for his team and everything else. So we've had really great people that way, you know. And I think some of that's a reflection of hopefully the integrity you try to bring to the job all the time, and your commitment to being the best, and stay out of your fight coach's way, because that's how they're going to win the fight, not me.
All right, well, good advice on that one. And I wanted to go back to another piece of advice, which I think you could share. I was watching a piece on the Dominic Cruz piece that you did, where, you know, he had an unsuccessful surgery the first time, and you advised him to do another one. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. So actually what happened is a guy named Darren Hill called me about Dominic had just torn his ACL. And he followed Dominic a lot. He was into jiu-jitsu himself, and he was like, "You mind talking to him?" I'm like, "Sure." And we had just kind of finished with George's and everything else. And I said, you know, who are you going to for the surgery? What graft are they doing? And they were putting a cadaver graft in. And I was like, "Man, you can't do that." He's like, "Well, UFC's really pushing it, and they're telling me I'll come back quicker." I'm like, "Listen, man, this could end your career if you do this." And he doesn't know me. So I put an email together, put the research showing that it's a, you know, potential risk of re-injury is 500% greater than a patella tendon graft, and you never get the same integrity back because it's not your tissue. So when you put a cadaver graft in, it has to develop its own blood supply, and if it doesn't, that thing is just dead tissue. Well, he was having problems with his from this. They did a cadaver graft, they didn't listen, and he, you know, succumbed to the pressure of what the UFC was putting on him, and it cost him bad. Like, he ended up being out losing 2 years of his career, and had to go back in and do a patella tendon graft. And so I think it's more of the fact of you get a surgeon that is really comfortable in doing that surgery, and it's an art. And I've sat in on many of them, and when you see what it is, it's like a high-level carpenter. And there are great carpenters, and there's also carpenters. You know, we're fortunate in that for an ACL, I use Dr. Neil Elatrash out of Curlin and Job in LA. He's the best, arguably, again, in the world. And we've always sought out whoever the best is, sit down, talk to them first. Like when we approached him about George, because George was getting advice in Montreal to put a synthetic graft in your knee. I'm like, okay, that didn't work 20 years ago, and I don't know who's telling you this. You flat out can't do that. Like, this is over. And once that damage and that surgery's been done in there, they might be able to get it back to 85% or so, but that's it. And that's how bad the information is. And I think that's the problem that the athlete faces. Who do you believe? And there's so much contradicting information out there. And what we've really tried to do is go back to what is the science that says that. That's why my company's called that. We don't use principles in there that don't have some scientific proof that they work. And we're constantly trying to push that envelope and push the envelope of the human mechanics of how to be the most efficient, best at what you can do in your movement, whether it's throwing, hitting a tennis ball, it doesn't matter what it is. I work with athletes across the whole spectrum. So it's more of a fact of when you don't know something, who's the best at what they do, let's go sit down and talk to them.
Are you still in contact with some of the guys that you used to work with? And in particular, I want to talk about George St. Pierre, because I think a lot of people are still debating whether he is going to be fighting again, or, you know, is there any talks to that from his point of view?
Yeah, I mean, so, like, it's the fight business, man. When somebody comes to you and says, here's $14 million, you're going to listen. Is he comfortable right now in his retirement? Yeah, I think he is. What is the other challenge he has now? There's really nothing. I mean, when you look at, like, from a respect standpoint in the fight business, you can't garner more respect than he's built. If you meet him as a person, you're going to walk away with the same feeling of respect as a human being. So what do you have to prove? I think the hardest thing for someone like him and any of these guys is, how do you turn it off? And especially when you know that you're still highly, highly skilled. And people don't realize that, like, this is George's life. Being the best martial artist is his life. So he trains every day. He's still training every day. He always will. That's never going to stop. He's not this guy that, okay, stops fighting and you'll never see him in the gym again. That's just not how it works for him. And so he loves it. It's a part of his DNA. So to say that he'll never fight again, we'll see. If he doesn't come back, and I actually hope he doesn't, he's healthy. A lot of these guys, like, they push it. He's, you know, in places they shouldn't. He's financially set up the rest of his life. Most of these fighters, right, that are older and are fighting for one reason, and it's money. And they need it, and they haven't looked after their resources the way they should. So he's not in that situation, and in the way he's developed his career is in such a professional manner. He has a lot of great sponsors around him still. They've really, you know, done a good job in keeping him that way. Like when you go to a press conference, he'll be in a suit. Everyone else is not dressed like that. He's very honest in his approach in terms of the way he talks to people, so you always walk away with a good feeling from him. But, you know, he's when you look at the gamut of of a fighter and you go, okay, what's in his toolbox? Well, I'd say his fight IQ is in the top 1/10 of 1% of the sport. Athletically, he's in the top, you know, half of 1% or whatever. If you compared him athletically to like the best football player or anything else, is he that? No. But if you had to put him into that environment, he's going to sure try to get to there. His ground and pound, I mean, come on, it's the best in the world. I mean, Khabib's a second place to that. His wrestling is the best in the world. Another example of why he's as good as he is. I mean, he sucked at it and goes to the Canadian Olympic wrestling team and says, help me. And they'll be the first to tell you, like, it just started going like this. And now, I mean, he's as good as anybody. His takedown stuff, like, and the timing of it and the way he sets it up and everything else, there's nobody that's ever had it like he does. I'd say Khabib's up there, but and his movement, you know, his power, his, you know, there's so many skills he brings to the table. So now you have so much you have to overcome. And like any fight coach will tell you, it's like your foundation is what decides the fight. So the more this thing grows, the more adversity you can handle, and the more things you've been dealt with and have an answer to. Because that's all fighting is how to figure out a problem while the guy across from you is trying to kill you. That's really what it is, and he's as good as it gets.
From what it sounds like, your specific guy that you like to work with is somewhere in between a Miguel Cotto and a George St. Pierre. So if there were one athlete, that would probably be the perfect athlete for you. What are the other characteristics that you like when people want to come to you and they say, listen, I want to work with you? What are those aspects?
Well, I mean, I don't decide like working with somebody because of their talent. I decide to want to work with somebody because of their work ethic. There's lots of talented people out there. They don't have work ethic and they don't go anywhere. The fight business is littered with it. So it's more of a commitment, because if you take like Miguel, you know, his father had him out running every morning at 4:30, something like that in the morning. So in his brain, his mechanism is trained to get up at early in the morning. So I had to get up every morning at 3:30, drive to LA, and we work out from 5 to 7. So if the guy isn't into it, you really think I'm going to do that? No. But when you see like the level of commitment he has, it actually makes you want to work harder. And you want to make sure that when Saturday night rolls around and you're in Madison Square Garden, that you let the lion out of the cage. And he's not flat, he hasn't been overtrained. There's, you know, you're taking your life in your hands. People get killed in this. And so when you look at how some of these people approach it, it's a disgrace. How does a fight coach put an oxygen mask on a fighter and tell him he's using altitude training? You can't change your altitude by putting a mask on. All you did was deprive him of oxygen. And that's not what higher altitude does. The pressure changes, so your ability to absorb oxygen changes. So the very thing you said you're helping your fighter do and improve, you're actually hurting. And again, that's not my opinion, that's the science of it. And you can't debate these things, and yet you see it all the time. And we had a fighter that, you know, left us and went on and started training with someone else, and you see him using oxygen deprivation, and he's as flat as a pancake. Never won another fight. And it's sad because he's talented. But that's what happens in the fight business. So when you look at somebody like Freddie, who's had such a long career in this, well, why is that? The guy's gym's open every morning at 7. He's there. It closes every night at 8. He's there. He's the hardest working coach in the business. And he always has been. And, you know, everyone, when you look at a track record of success and you'll go, oh, you got lucky, well, with Pacquiao or something like that, well, sure, is it luck? Or was he the only coach in LA that saw something special in a 112-pound Filipino kid that no one else wanted to train? Which is it? And no fighter gets to the top without the right coach. It's too hard. And there's too many guys that are good at this. when you see the nuances like in close, it's like when you see Pacquiao live, you know, practicing, you've never seen hand speed like this in your life. It's a joke. When you see Miguel, you've never seen anybody hit that hard. So when he drops his left hand, if it lands, fight's over. If it landed in your rib cage and stuff, it's just a question of how long it takes him to put you down. George's ability to actually start using his front hand, Freddie helped him with that. And once he started really establishing distance with his front hand, he could control his opponent so much better. I think it changed the course of his career. But you have to have somebody that has the knowledge to give it to you, because it's too hard. You'll never figure it out on your own. And you'll certainly never do it in the lights of a stadium when it really matters. No athlete in the world rises to an occasion, ever. They fall to whatever their level of preparation was. And the minute the shit hits the fan, well, you probably can't put that on there, but the minute it hits the fan, they're going to go back to what they know, as we were talking about. So what they know better be a fundamental that can be executed when I'm hurt, because that's the only way I'm getting out of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, I'll explain that. And I want to talk about, let's stay on the topic of trainers.
Yeah.
You mentioned Freddie Roach. In South Africa, anyone that's caught your eye?
Well, yeah, obviously Sebastian. Like, the fight business, again, you have to get a little lucky with some things. Like, in the States, if you get the right kid come in, the next thing you know, you're on, well, not on HBO anymore, but you're on Showtime, and all of a sudden people know your name, and it brings, more clients to you. It's a harder route when you have to have, a small gym in a city where your work actually has to get people to you. So there's a difference between success through association, like got lucky, I have an athlete that did well, maybe I've helped him, maybe I haven't, as opposed to how many people did you develop. And that's the real difference between the best trainers. And so when you start looking at people's work ethic and how they're trying to implement it and everything else, that's what I look for. Social media has kind of changed all this, because in my era and growing up and stuff, you really had to be good at what you did to get anybody. But now social media can make it look like you're good. Big difference. So gyms like this, and you walk in and you see just the way they're structured, and you know what you're dealing with. You go to Freddie's gym, like, it's in West Hollywood, man. This isn't a great place. Like, it's terrible.
I'll stay there.
Yeah, and you go in his gym and it's just this hodgepodge of pictures everywhere, but it's true history, and it's a place where people work. And if you don't work, you have no respect for him. Not zero. Like, he'll just turn an eye to you, and that's the end of it. But the guys will work. Like, he's there for you 24/7. It's no different than here. And that's what you always look for, because, like, you have to get to the top of the sport, you have to get the right lion. You might not. It's just part of the job you chose. It's part of the career path you chose.
Well, I want to ask you like an old question, because a lot of people will compare NFL and rugby, and the intensity levels and so forth. What are the differences in coaching between the two different sports from your perspective?
Wow, man, you really are trying to dig up the hornet's nest with this one. So, like, the differences in the levels, I'd say in the NFL, like, you have the systems are so much more evolved that they're implemented. So you're dealing with a head coach that is really relying on his offensive and defensive coordinators to implement both sides of the ball. If you don't have great people in those areas, you have no chance of succeeding. Doesn't matter what your talent is on the team, nothing. It's a really difficult sport to really get to the elite levels on, because you need 22 athletes that are all freaks, doing what you tell them to do, that are mentally tough, don't break down because of the situation, and you're then relying on your staff to make sure each one of these people implements this. So when you look at college football and the success at Alabama, you've got the best manager at the top. Is he the best coach? I don't know, I haven't met him. But certainly he's making sure that everything within his structure is done a certain way and implemented a certain way. And without it, they then attract 5-star freaks. Well, if you have freaks with the right system, you're going to succeed. My first experiences here was with the Cheetahs, and the head coach, Naka, at the time, gave Neil and us the freedom to really implement this, and it worked. Other situations don't have that same freedom, it's not going to work. And I would say there's a big difference in terms of some of the professionalism I've seen in some of the coaching here. And it wasn't positive. So, again, it's how does it evolve? And that's what really it has to get to. And you have to have people in place that want to be the best to have anything evolve. Not people that are bureaucrats just collecting a paycheck and don't really care about the result. There's a big difference that way. So you're talking about athletically, comparing athletes to athletes. Rugby has some of the best freaks in the world. Absolutely. And so does the NFL. And trying to say that like NFL athletes are so much better than rugby, well, I've worked with the best in both of them. That's just not true. Like, the athletes that come out of here are the best in the world and on so many levels. And I 100% know for a fact that if you put them in an NFL environment, they'll have the same level of success. But they have to have played that sport. They're different. Rugby relies so much more on the ability to just run. Whereas NFL, it's 5 seconds, the play's over, you start again. It's a much different thing. And because of the way the plays are structured and 4 downs to get a first down and everything, there's a lot more rest for offenses and defenses. So the physical cardiovascular conditioning is night and day. And the impacts of the NFL are much greater. But that's not because rugby players can't impact or hit that hard. They're not wearing body armor. Like, you're actually having to hit with your own body and your own head. So your self-preservation is only going to allow you to do so much impact on that. And some of the hits you see in the sport are a joke. And how does a guy even get up from that? So they're great. Like, both sports are different. And neither one to me is any better.
What sort of myths did you have to dispel when you got here? Like, if athletes approached you and they were doing it a certain way in rugby, I'm talking about specifically.
That's the same all over the world. Everybody's following this mythical improvement of what strength training is. That if I lift weights, I'm a better athlete. That's categorically not true. And people have to understand what strength is. What strength are you trying to improve? There's 9 of them. So conventional weightlifting is improving what's called absolute strength. My ability to move an external load with unlimited time to do it. Well, when do you ever do that in sports? Rugby players, frontline guys, it's 2% of the game, and yet they train 100% of the time for that. Their running is 98% of their sport, and they're not doing physical conditioning to actually improve that. So the way a human produces strength, standing still with their feet on the ground, in constant contact with the ground, and how they produce power in running are complete opposites. One is a complete, what's called concentric muscular base, and the other one relies 100% on the elasticity of your tendons. And if you know that heavy weightlifting destroys the elasticity of your tendons, then obviously you would start limiting that. Why do we have this epidemic of soft tissue injuries throughout contact sports and sports in general? Where'd it come from? Didn't happen in my era. My high school, I played 7 sports, 5 years of it because it's Canada and you go to grade 13. There was never one ACL tear, girl or guys. Now it's everywhere. What's changed? Because if you take a human body that's 60% water and you start compressing it under 400, 500 pound loads, clearly it's going to damage it. And the lie that's been told is that this damage is making you a better athlete. The simpler way to understand physiology is that you have to have a certain genetic makeup to play sports. It's no different than the jungle. If you're going to make a football team out of animals, all your linemen are elephants. All your linebackers and fullbacks are lions. All the guys on the outside of their speed are cheetahs. You can't turn a cheetah into an elephant, and you sure as hell can't turn an elephant into a cheetah. So it still comes back to a certain genetic profile. But the simplest thing to understand in movement is we rely on our muscles to stretch out very quickly and contract. And the more heavy weightlifting you do, it inhibits that, it doesn't help it. Because the muscle transmits force this way. When you compress it, it grows muscle that way. They're the polar opposite of what you need. And it starts pulling away the connective tissue. It's called a pronation angle. And when you do that, it actually destabilizes the very joint you said you were helping by strengthening this way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense.
Yeah.
And in terms of boxing, you said something interesting that I also picked up with, in terms of mixing up your exercises, not doing the same repetitive things over and over, because you get some people that will do the same camp over and over again, something, and not improve, they just sort of maintain their levels. Could you just get a little bit more into that?
Well, we use some simple things, like we make a little 1-foot box that's, 2 feet long, about 2 feet wide. We have him up and over a box, and he'll do it for 3 minutes at a time. Miguel, when he started, could barely do a round or two of it. And by the time we were into our second fight camp, he could do 12 rounds of that, 3 minutes. You'll never move that much in a fight. Never. At most, it would be 4 rounds of that drill. And so mentally, you know that your legs can do whatever you ask them to do. And remember, you fail in a fight because of your mind. Because this whole idea that you can improve someone's mind, it all revolves around their execution. So if your body is failing, your mind knows it. And it won't matter how tough you think you are. You know, I grew up in hockey, I've been in a ton of fights. I can handle myself with a basic person. Against George, he's going to rip my head off and like, he won't even break a sweat doing it. His skill sets are so much further. And so your training is what toughens your mind, because your mind starts believing in what it can execute. And under pressure, that's what can crack. And so the more you start training physically around enhancing that skill set, well then obviously you're going to get a better result. We put guys in the pool, they'll have to throw 300 punches around, and they'll do 6-7 of those to prepare for a fight camp. So now their arms, they know that they can drop 1,500 punches if they have to. It's really simple things like that to reinforce their belief of what they have to execute. And then again, staying out of your fight coach's way. I'm not the fight trainer. And making sure you listen and that relationship stays healthy, because at the end of the day, after I've got the car running and he's got gas in the tank, he's got to drive it. And our coach has to make sure that he's executing our plan. I mean, I think the best execution of a fight plan that I've ever been a part of, was Miguel Cotto versus Sergio Martinez. Because from the very first day of camp, Freddie brought in a fighter to imitate Sergio in the way he drops his front arm and fakes and tries to do whatever. And he literally started teaching me, this is what I want you to do. The second you see that fake, I want you to attack him. I don't want you to give him momentum coming forward. And you're going to go over that front arm and after his head. And he had him sliding to the side, doing it every single day. And he caught him in 30 seconds. That was the best execution of it. And the great thing about that fight was Miguel's discipline to not get over aggressive, because Sergio still has a bomb of a hand, and if you catch it, the fight's over. That's what everyone forgets. You make one mistake, you're asleep. And his discipline to just keep beating him up, stay outside of him, keep beating him up, don't give him a chance to get to you. And that's what I think Freddie really did a great job with Miguel at the end of his career, is stop being such a warrior, use it when you need to. Use your great boxing and fighting abilities, get in, get out, and move. And boy, that was the best night ever. Like, just because he's just such a good guy. So.
Do you miss working with Freddie? I mean, he seems like he
I
holds.
just worked with him this summer. Right?
So you
such a crazy year this year with everything that's happened. So, I mean, I saw him this last year a bunch of times and stuff. The whole fight business has fallen apart because of COVID. And so like everything's changed, from the financial side to it, to how camps are, to everything. And how it's going to get resurrected now, who knows? Like, the stupidity of how we're handling all this is unbelievable. But I have the greatest respect for Freddie, what he's done, his work ethic, the way he treats his fighters. Like, he's a great person, great coach. He's one of the best coaches in all of sports, not boxing. That's what people don't recognize. And they don't know enough about all the other people that he's done with this. Or done this with. And he was a great fighter himself. As I was telling you earlier, he grew up in the projects in Boston. His dad was a great street fighter that the cops didn't want a whole lot to do with. And all the sons were taught to box. And Freddie will tell you right off, he wasn't the most talented. He had the best work ethic of them all. I think he wanted it the most. But when you look at his journey through all this and how he had to get to where he's at, I mean, geez. Like, it's been a long road and a tough road, and the perseverance of it, and so I have the utmost respect for him.
Well, it's been a very educational interview. It's been a very long one, nice one for the fans. I think a lot of the people that will be watching the video are going to be really grateful for you sitting down with us and having a chat.
Oh, yeah, no problem.
South Africans are going to benefit from this as well, and obviously we want you to stay as long as possible so we can benefit from what you got. So thank you very much for joining us.
No, I really appreciate it. Anytime.